We're in Wisconsin today. It is day one of Taylor Schabusiness' trial, and she is accused of murdering her longtime childhood best friend and boyfriend as well. Now, the details does get pretty gruesome. They're not going to show anything, of course, but we're going to start with the opening statements. We're going to listen to the testimonies, and then at some point, because there's a lot of breaks and there's a lot of like mishaps in between, we'll probably end up catching up with the live stream. But I hope you guys had a good weekend, and we're going to start with the trial right now. Right now, we're going to start with the prosecutor's opening statements, and after he goes, then it'll be Taylor Schabusiness' attorney's turn. I believe she has a public defender.
Statements are not evidence. Having said that, Mr. Saunders, are you prepared to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good morning.
I'm going to speed up just a little bit. I'll probably adjust it depending on how fast their cadence is, and then we'll see. Hey, guys.
The evidence in this case will show that in the early morning of February 22nd of 2022, the defendant strangled her friend Shad Thyrion to death using a dog collar. That after he was dead, engaged in sexual acts with him, with his body, subsequently dismembered him using kitchen knives found in the home. Over the next few days, in the first phase of trial, the state of Wisconsin, myself, District Attorney Lassay, will present a number of witnesses who will testify about what happened in this case. That will show and demonstrate to you that the defendant committed these acts.
And then also, because it's a live stream right now, there are no captions available, but maybe when we go over to Law and Crime, maybe the captions will be generated by then. I don't know. Sometimes the caption shows up during a live stream, sometimes it doesn't.
You'll hear testimony and evidence will show that in the early morning of February 23rd, is a Tuesday, kind of a normal cold February in Wisconsin, at a house on Stony Brook Lane. It's sort of, if you know the area, west side of Green Bay, Fireman's Park, West Mason Street, that area. Tara Packnage is kind of in her home and is awoken by a storm door shut. There's a door that sort of abuts the driveway to the residence, normal single-family home in the area. Here's a storm door close and is awoken from sleep. It's early morning, 2:30, 3 a.m., somewhere in there. She goes and gets up. It kind of wakes her up, and she's aware at that point that her son, Shad, was in the basement with a friend, Taylor. They had been over the day before, February 22nd.
I feel so bad for the mom.
And she kind of goes and sees what's going on, right? We hear this noise late in the night, early in the morning, and she sees the basement light is on. At that point, she's aware that, they were down there throughout the day of the 22nd, and she goes down and sees, because the light's on in the basement, and she's seeing what's going on. And you'll see sort of the scene. You sort of go down the stairs to a normal basement. It's partially finished on one half, partially like a utility area, laundry, that kind of storage area. And right next to the stairs, there's a 5-gallon bucket that you'd get at a home center. And she lifts a towel that's covering the bucket. It's like a beach towel. And unfortunately, sees essentially a mother's worst nightmare. That her son's head is in the bucket. Understandably, you'll hear testimony about that and the shock that caused. Tara goes and talks to her boyfriend who lives in the home, Steve. You'll hear from him. He goes and checks too, and ultimately they call 911. And that's how this case comes to be. You'll hear from the officers this morning, likely, who arrived on scene and what they observed, obviously confirming the information that was reported to law enforcement about Shad's circumstances.
I kind of wish we would stop walking back and forth because the audio kind of drifts off and away. But at least not that bad. We get pretty decent audio and we get pretty decent video quality for this trial coverage, from what I've seen so far.
They find the bucket and it has parts of Shad as well as knives. You'll hear about, at that point, a relative lack of other indicia of a crime occurred. It's not a significant amount of blood on the walls and the floor. There's some, you'll hear about that, but
hey, Linda.
It takes law enforcement time to see what actually happened, the full extent of what the defendant did in this case. By that point, they're actually interviewing the defendant, and she's providing them information that, no, Shad's still in the basement. The rest of him is still in the basement. And ultimately, you'll hear about what officers find in that basement. There's, as I mentioned, the living area has some mattresses, blood-soaked. Once you remove the blankets, other clothing items.
Yeah, so initially when they entered the crime scene, it's you don't really see a lot of blood everywhere. You would think that with the dismemberment, there'd be blood everywhere. But I think the officer noted there was some dry blood, maybe some, I don't know, dry blood on the bed, maybe some other stuff in the shower or something like that. But like, it doesn't, when they initially walked in, it doesn't seem like a crazy crime scene, even though they know what the call is about.
Tote, a teal tote, kind of a larger Tupperware that has knives as well as body parts of Shad. There's bags, a sort of duffel bag type item, a backpack, all of which contain parts of Shad's body, as well as knives that were used in the dismemberment. And you'll hear all about that. The officers who responded on scene and processed the evidence, ultimately locating parts of Shad. You'll hear about then other things that are found. Signs of methamphetamine use, which the defendant later acknowledges happened with her and Shad right before this crime occurred. Cleaning products. As I mentioned, you may have an idea in your head of this crime and what that looks like and what law enforcement would encounter when they got there, and you'll see what actually encountered. You'll hear about Clorox wipes and how the defendant would go to the shower and sort of clean up and use a squeegee and clean up the scene.
Oh, she tried to clean it up? I didn't know that.
You'll hear about the medical examiner and their team who arrive and are dealing with this situation, and it's determined that not all of Shad is located in the basement. There's certain parts that are missing, and ultimately, in the van that the defendant is driving, the gold minivan, there's additional legs of Shad found in that van. You'll hear from Dr. Vincent Tranquita. He's our medical examiner at the time. He will testify about cause and manner of death. And you'll hear about the cause being strangulation. Significant force applied to the neck, significant signs of strangulation that you'll hear about, and then ultimately, obviously, a significant amount of dismemberment after the fact. You'll hear Dr. Tranquita talk about that. That's all happening at Stony Brook. And 23rd, throughout that day, you'll hear about significant investigation that goes on at that house. And then you'll hear about then, a few hours after that initial 911 call, how law enforcement kind of gets word that, Shad was with the defendant, Ms. Schabusiness, before this offense, and they locate her at her apartment on Eastman Avenue, sort of on the other side of Green Bay, east side. Encountered as she's leaving the apartment that she shares with another person. And you'll see that encounter, how the defendant is essentially literally caught red-handed, blood on her hands. There's a significant knife wound that she talks about later was suffered in the course of the crimes. There's blood on her clothing. There's black.
Oh, she had to clean up with the extent that she dismembered him. I wasn't sure if it happened, like if the dismemberment. No, I guess that would make sense because I wasn't sure where the dismemberment would happen. I know that like the strangling happened in the bedroom, but it wouldn't make sense for her to like bring the body to like, I think they had like a car or like RV or something, right? But yeah, I guess it would all happen in the bedroom. Jeez. I'm actually really surprised that she cleaned up and everything. I thought she was trying to go for like, oh, I'm the crazy type of person defense or something. I didn't know what I was doing.
Sweatshirt, black sweatpants. And she talks with law enforcement for a pretty significant amount of time. Detective David Groff, who's seated at counsel table here, interviews the defendant along with another detective, and they start to learn more about what happened in this case and sort of the hours leading up to the crimes. Again, it's a significant and lengthy interview, and the defendant's providing information that you'll see.
Yeah, initially I thought that I thought like it happened in a van. I thought like it was a van where it was like spacious enough where like, I don't know, two people could have sex. And I thought it happened in there. And I thought that's where she dismembered it. And I thought she bought his head into the bucket in the basement. So I wasn't really sure about that detail. Sorry, that was a loud ringtone.
Jives with what law enforcement's encountering in that basement. She admits to, as I mentioned, methamphetamine use before this. She and Shad were sort of hanging out beforehand. They were friends from school back in the day, and it seems like they were in a friendly state at the time of this offense. And you'll hear then they go to the Stony Brook Lane home and go to the basement. They're let in by Steve. You'll hear about that in the early morning of the 22nd. You'll hear the defendant describe that what apparently begins as a somewhat sexual encounter escalates to a dog collar being placed around Shad's neck. And the defendant quite vividly describes what she then did. She's yanking on the chain. She's describing what's happening to Shad.
I wonder if we're going to hear the interrogation video. I'm very curious to see what her defense team is going to say.
It's evidence that you'll hear, and you'll hear it from the defendant's own mouth, that shows that this is an intentional act. It's not one pull of a gun trigger. It's an intense act. You'll hear about that from Vincent Tranquita, Dr. Tranquita as well. She's pulling harder, just hoping that he eventually passes, and it takes a significant amount of time. It takes several minutes, so you'll hear her say. After that, after Shad's deceased, she describes what she then does with his body, again, engaging in sexual acts, ultimately dismembering him quite significantly. She reports that afterwards, that law enforcement would have fun finding all the body parts that are located throughout the basement, told law enforcement where to find certain body parts. Like I said, it wasn't obvious to law enforcement who initially...
This is Taylor Schabusiness right here. Now, throughout the entire trial that I've seen so far, I don't know, she makes a lot of like really interesting, bizarre facial expressions. I can't really like read her. Sometimes it looks like she's kind of like upset, but then sometimes it looks like she's smirking, smiling a little bit. She looks a little menacing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Respond to that basement. What happened? It's information being provided by the defendant that...
Like right now she's listening, but wait until later on when she's listening to other testimonies.
You'll hear the defendant admit to cleaning up, avoiding guilt,
she laughs a lot.
avoiding responsibility for this.
Or to me, it seems like a lot because, you know, like laughing like more than 5 times seems a little bit inappropriate. But there are times where I could see her like kind of like chuckling a little bit, but she's not really talking to anyone. She's not talking to her lawyer. She's just sitting there like chuckling to herself.
You'll hear her talk about that. You'll see the signs of that, as I mentioned earlier. That dismemberment process takes that entire day of the 22nd, essentially. As I mentioned, Tara wakes up to Taylor leaving at about 2:33 a.m. on the 23rd.
And this was a year and a half ago, I believe.
The investigation doesn't stop there, despite the defendant's confessions. Law enforcement continues. They send DNA to the lab, and it confirms the accounts that we're getting here. Blood on the defendant's hands, left and right hands, or Shad's. Blood on the knives, some of the knives that are used is Shad's. Clothing item, as I mentioned, the black sweatshirt, black sweatpants, has red substances, blood on the sweatpants, all consistent with what happened, with the defendant's statements, with what law enforcement's seeing. So this case is really not a whodunit. You'll hear about the crimes that clearly occurred. You'll hear the defendant's statements.
Micah, I have no idea. That's why I'm very curious to see what her defense team is going to say. I have no idea. Like, we're not really sure if she was like pissed at him, if he did something, if she was just really high off her fucking bonkers, if she's just evil. We don't know anything. But all I know so far is I don't believe that they're doing not guilty by insanity. I haven't heard anything about that. Yeah, I don't know what her defense is going to be. It's just like, yeah, she kind of just did it. And I don't know.
Saying, yep, I did it. And you have DNA evidence and other investigative tools that kind of corroborate everything else. So for this, the defendant's charged with the 3 crimes that the judge read off earlier. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse or dismembering the corpse, and then third-degree sexual assault. So we'll get into what that all means later. We'll have closing arguments where we kind of provide summation and provide all that to you. But for now, as you kind of listen to the evidence, count 1, the state needs to prove that the defendant caused the death of Shad and that she did so intentionally. As I mentioned, you're going to hear a lot about that. And it's nothing but intentional. This is not an accident. This is not a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
It's a significant act the defendant did. Dismembering a corpse for the purpose of concealing a crime, you'll hear a lot about that. And third-degree sexual assault, how she engaged in oral contact with Shad's body and inserted objects in his body as well after the fact.
Initially, her defense team was trying to throw that part out, the sexual assault part, because they were like, well, Shad was deceased. You can't really sexually assault someone if they're deceased, but that was thrown out, so the court didn't allow for that. Let's go to, because he's going to talk about the charges. Let's go to, this is her attorney right here.
Your Honor, may it please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Lassay, Mr. Saunders. Thank you for your service as jurors. We definitely appreciate you being here, serving on the jury, because a jury is an integral part of the court process. Without you jurors, our court system simply couldn't function. The lawyers couldn't do their job, and the court couldn't do its job. So we appreciate your time, your attention to detail, and your anticipated focus over the next several days that you're going to put into this very serious case. Now, in this case, the state of Wisconsin, through the Brown County District Attorney's Office, has the complete burden of proof. The state must prove to all of you jurors, beyond a reasonable doubt, each and every element of the crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. The United States Constitution presumes that every person who is accused of a crime is presumed to be innocent. And in this case, Taylor Schabusiness is presumed to be innocent. She doesn't have to prove anything. The defense does not have to prove anything in this case. Why? Because the complete burden of proof rests with the District Attorney's Office, with the state of Wisconsin. They have to prove up all the facts. And in this case, you're going to hear a lot of different facts. You're going to hear a lot of different accounts from witnesses, citizen witnesses, detectives, police officers, experts. DNA analysts, medical examiners, all of that. You're going to have to take all of that information into consideration when you deliberate. But the entire burden rests with the state in this case. My client, Taylor Denise Schabusiness, also has an absolute right to remain silent. Under the law, she has a right not to testify if she so chooses.
Yeah,
And if
she shouldn't
elects
talk.
not to testify, you cannot use that fact alone against her in this trial. She doesn't have to testify, but she may testify. In this particular case, ladies and gentlemen, Taylor Denise Schabusiness was friends with Shad. They went to high school together. They went to school at Bayport, and they had classes together. And they were, when they were younger, they dated for a short period of time. But basically, they were friends. You're going to hear some testimony on, it was Wednesday, February 23rd of 2022. You're going to hear, I believe, a 911 tape. You're going to hear testimony from Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks. They live at 829 Stony Brook Lane in Green Bay. There was a call from Mr. Hendricks that he apparently went downstairs in the basement and saw.
Yeah, she might be shackled underneath the desk. I don't think I've seen her hands yet. She might be shackled like her hands and her feet because she did attack her previous lawyer at some point.
Saw a bucket, saw a human head in the bucket, and he had checked it out because his significant other, Tara Pakinich, had initially went down there and saw this and had him go check. He didn't have glasses on, but he apparently called 911, and that caused the officers to come to the scene at 829 Stony Brook Lane. And there'll be some testimony about this residence. It's a small, quaint home. It's got a loft upstairs where I believe Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks were sleeping. And it has a floor level with a kitchen, living area, and then it has a basement. And there will be testimony. We believe that Stephen Hendricks last saw Shad at the house on Monday night, which I believe would have been February 21st of 2022. He will indicate that, both of them will indicate that they really did not see Taylor Schabusiness leave. They heard a vehicle start, a door slam, caused them
I think we can speed him up a little bit.
to wake up. Officer Wanish, you'll hear from him. He came to the house and went down the basement to make some observations that the officers did.
Is this the guy she previously attacked? I don't believe so. I think the lawyer that she attacked is gone now. I don't think he's working on the case. I can look it up really quick.
Detective sweep. They walked around
Pretty
the
sure.
basement and the entire house to see if there were any other people there. On February 23rd, 2022, the only people that were there were Tara Pakinich, the owner, Stephen Hendricks, and daughter Ava Wheelock. Those people were there. No Taylor Schabusiness was there. She wasn't in the basement. She wasn't anywhere in the house. But obviously there was some investigation, and evidence was apparently found. And it's true that law enforcement officers didn't have a clear picture, clear understanding of what was really happening or what happened.
Yeah,
so they're
this is
trying
new
to
lawyer.
figure things out as they went along. There would be some testimony from other officers with regards to the other scene, which is 2353 Eastman Avenue in Green Bay. That, I submit, was Taylor Schabusiness's apartment. And she lived there with Scott Thoms, Thoms. And law enforcement officers came over there, and my client came out of the apartment complex, and she was arrested. She had a warrant. She was taken into a squad car and taken down to the Green Bay Police Department for questioning by Detective Groff and Detective Kevin Kempf. Also, law enforcement arrested the other person in apartment one, that was Taylor's apartment, Scott Thoms, and he was ordered to lay on the ground, and he was taken into custody as well. You'll hear from lots of different officers, in this case, law enforcement officers. The officers found a gold Chrysler Town and Country minivan, I believe 2006, and they found it parked in the Eastman Avenue parking lot, and there were some concerns about it. Now, this vehicle is owned by Scott Thoms, and I believe that will come out that he was the one that owned that vehicle. But it's
Oh, thank you, Vaughn. There's a potential for two phases in the trial. In the first one, jurors will decide if she's guilty of 3 felony charges in Thyrion's death in February 2022. The jury finds her guilty on any of the charges. Second phase will focus on if she was responsible for the crime or if she suffered a mental disease or defect.
inside that vehicle, there was
Thank
a
you.
crock pot box, and there were some human body parts in there. In this particular case, you'll also hear from Dr. Tranchita. He's the medical examiner, did a lot of investigative work, looking at cause and manner of death of the deceased. So you'll hear about all of his findings. You're also going to hear from Kevin Scott. He's the DNA analyst for the State of Wisconsin Crime Lab, and his testimony, I believe, will show that he took various swabs as part of the DNA analysis, and items were swabbed. There were sweatpants, there were blades, there were light switch, there was boxes, hands, people's mouths, and a dildo, because that was found.
Paul says, I thought they needed to determine sanity first to decide if she's fit to stand trial. They did. A couple days ago, the judge found her competent enough to stand trial.
The swab of the dildo, he will testify, I believe, that the possible contribution of DNA from Shad Thyrion as it relates to the dildo is inconclusive due to the complexity of the mixture. So the state is going to argue that there was a sexual assault by use of the dildo and the deceased DNA is not on it. So that's something you'll have to take into consideration. You're going to hear from Sergeant Kirk Brester from the Green Bay Police Department. He was dispatched to 829 Stony Brook Lane regarding a suspicious situation on February 23rd, 2022. And that he conferred with Officer Wanish outside, that he had contact with Tara Pakinich and Stephen Hendricks, and that he did a protective sweep of the residence, and they didn't find anybody else other than Ava Wheelock, who was the young lady, she was 16, sleeping in a bedroom. You're going to hear from, I believe, Officer T.J. Buckman, that he arrived on the scene as a supervisor to this apartment complex, and he actually went to 2353 Eastman Avenue in Green Bay, and he saw that gold van parked outside, and he had several other officers keep the van under surveillance. And at least from his initial investigation, he did not have enough information to determine whether or not Taylor Schabusiness was the suspect or the victim. And so those are some other things that you're going to have to take a look at and think about. You're going to see the videotape in this case where there's a lengthy video down at the Green Bay Police Department between Detective Groff and Detective Kempf and my client, Taylor Denise Schabusiness. And they talked, and Detective Groff asked her lots of questions about what she knew and her whereabouts and what may or may not have happened. So you have to pay close attention to that and think about the things that are said. In a case like this, and really in any case, you have to assess the credibility of each and every witness. You have to take all of that into consideration in this matter. I'd ask that you, when you're considering all of the evidence, don't jump to conclusions, don't rush to judgment. Please keep an open mind. Listen to all the facts, listen to what every witness has to say carefully and weigh what they have to say. And remember, there's always two sides to every story. You jurors are going to have to decipher the facts of what may have occurred, what didn't occur. But at the end of the case, we ask that you find our client not guilty on all the counts. Thank you.
All right. End of opening statement by the defense.